Right, greetings everyone. Ajahn is in the room right now. I hope you all can hear me. If you can hear me, could you give me a thumbs up? Oh, great. Okay, great. Okay, all right. We will now begin the session. We'll have Brother William and Sister Christine, please.
Brothers and sisters, please put our palms together in Anjali and we pay respect to Ajahn. First bow, second bow, third bow. Arahan Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavatam Avivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamman Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. About 3 times.
So, welcome to everyone. We'll start with a period of sitting like we do usually. So make yourselves at ease, sit comfortably. And once you're settled, just simply bring the awareness back to the body, noticing the posture, sitting. Whether you're sitting on a chair or sitting on the floor, just notice what it feels like sitting. We probably all just changed postures coming from different activities. So notice what it feels sitting down like right now. Take a moment to notice what the body feels like as a whole, sitting, just the general impression. This breathing body. And then allow the attention to gently, and at your own rhythm, sweep through the body. Noticing the head and shoulders, the chest and abdomen, the arms, the pelvis and the legs, and just take your time. Take an interest in what the body feels like as it's sitting here right now, breathing in and out. as we bring this awareness to the body, notice how sometimes certain small tensions that we hadn't noticed come into focus and awareness in the face, in the shoulders, in the hands. Tensions we don't usually notice, and just bringing awareness to them, we can let go, and the tension kind of starts dissolving. When you pay attention to the body like this, the breath naturally starts being a more important feature in awareness. Breathing in, breathing out. It's something that happens completely naturally in the body. Whether we're paying attention or not, as long as we're alive, the body breathes. And by bringing attention to it, you can notice how good it feels to the body to breathe. Breathing in brings oxygen to it. Breathing out relaxes it. as we bring attention to the sensations of the breathing. Sometimes the sensations in one part of the body are more prominent. Other parts of the body don't register as much feeling. Just notice that. And this body is a feeling thing. When we bring attention to it, we notice how every part of it feels, is sensitive. So holding this body in awareness, this sensitive form that breathes in and breathes out. And being present to it with an attitude of just kindness, acceptance, that it feels the way it feels, and kindness. Along with the experience of the body, of the breathing, there's the experience of the mind. It thinks, it remembers, it can feel peaceful or restless. It can feel settled or somewhat agitated. So we bring our attention to the present moment. To the body, to the breathing. It's like we invite the breath and the body to take the center stage of awareness. Sit down with it and then gently look at the whole picture. If we sit down and settle with the sensations of the breathing as a companion and a friend, in a relaxed way, not expecting anything, not making judgment values, in an open way, and we can have the breath and its sensations in the body as an anchor for bringing our attention to the present moment. And at the same time, notice the overall picture. We're holding the breath gently enough that we stay with it, and at the same time are able to notice the atmosphere in the mind, the mood, the general state of the mind. And the intention in the mind is to sit down, settle down with this body, breathing, and we're listening, we're observing. If thoughts arise, let them. Just stick with the breathing, the thoughts will pass. They have other business to do. Right now, we're enjoying the breath, the body, being present.
Ajahn, let now formally request for Dhamma sharing. Brahma Chaloka Dipati Sahampati Kata Jali Anan Divaram Ayachata Saanti Dasata Paraja Kajatika Dese Dudama Anukam Bimam Pajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So on our last two meetings, we had the opportunity to contemplate and consider the first two noble truths under a number of their aspects, under a number of angles. And today I wanted to reflect on the third noble truth, cessation. So what is cessation? In the context of the Four Noble Truths, we're talking about cessation of suffering, as that's really what the Four Noble Truths are a description of this phenomena. And stating that it exists and is worth paying attention to is one thing. And then naturally, as we start studying discontent, dukkha, we can't help but notice that it arises and ceases. So sometimes we think about the third noble truth, cessation, and what comes up in the mind is complete cessation of suffering, the realization of arahantship, of nibbana. The Buddha lived a lifetime seeking and then teaching the Dhamma, and passed away at 80 years old and entered final nibbana, parinibbana. And that's indeed one of the things that this third noble truth is pointing to. So that's thinking. And in terms of thinking, we create images, we create concepts. But the Buddha also talks about the Four Noble Truths as realizations that take place here and now. In the suttas, when the Buddha describes the realization of any bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, or even layperson who sees the Dhamma, it's always about realizing the Dhamma here and now. So it's important to find a way of bringing this home in a way that's meaningful for us, in a way that we can actually, in practice, see it here and now in our own experience. So what does that mean in terms of the third noble truth? there is such a thing as the arising and ceasing of dukkha, defilements that are underlying the attachment to desire, which is the cause of it, and the habit we have probably over many lifetimes of grasping desire, grasping hold of a body and a mind and calling it self. And then as long as we haven't realized what this body and this mind really are, and what it is, this thing that we call a self, what the nature of that is, as long as we haven't understood these clearly, then there's not yet letting go, and we keep being reborn. So there may well be complete cessation of suffering and the end of rebirth in samsara, this kind of general idea, which is very common culturally in the East, less common in the West. Some people subscribe to it. Some people are suspicious of it. Call it rebirth or reincarnation, past lives, future lives. And it's not to say that this is not valid or not true. But what does it mean for us here and now? And how can we use it here and now? How is the Buddha's teaching of value here and now? So in terms of cessation, the simple fact that the Buddha has elevated cessation to made it a noble truth is pointing out something very valuable again. It's the ending of things. Things arise and cease, and he's pointing out to the ending. Again, telling us it's important. Notice this. So we take an interest in this, we take an interest in starting to investigate ending, cessation. One of the first things we realize is that we don't usually pay attention to endings. We pay attention to beginnings. We like beginnings, the arising of experiences. But endings is not something we notice very often. Just watching how we relate to day and night. When dawn arises, we're very happy to see the light starting to appear in the sky outside. Maybe we have good weather, and it's a real beautiful experience, but we don't usually realize that the arising of dawn is the ending of the night. We pay attention to the arising of a new day, not so much to the ending of a night. In the evenings, at the end of the day, it tends to be the same thing. We kind of register that it's the end of the day and the evening's beginning. The night is beginning. And we're very often relating to experience in terms of what's starting now, rather than what is ending now. And it's very much connected with this habit we have of being born into experience, identifying with experiences arising in consciousness. So these experiences do arise, and they're exciting, they're interesting, they're engaging, but they cease as well. And what the Buddha is pointing to in terms of cessation is pay attention to this ending. And why is it worth paying attention to it? Because it's peaceful. There's a verse that Buddhist monks all over the world chant at the occasion of funerals. In Pali, Anicca Vata Sankhara. Many of you have maybe heard this before. Bhadavayadamino. So what this verse translates as is, what is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. Upajitawa niruchanti tesang upasamo sukho. And in the ending, there's peace. This is really worth paying attention to. It's a spot of marketing in the Buddha's teaching, some pointing out what's good about it. Because if we don't find something, if there's not something in it for us, we're not going to pay attention to it. That's the way we're hardwired, always looking for something that's benefiting us one way or another. And that's fair enough. The way we are hardwired with this body and mind is such that we're sensitive to praise, to success, and we tend to turn away from failures, from loss, from things we regard as detrimental, unbeneficial. So we use that in order to help direct attention, direct awareness, direct the process of studying, observing, listening, and understanding. So in cessation, there is peace. It's interesting to notice how our conditioning, our cultural conditioning, human conditioning, how we're hardwired how to say this? Predisposes us to notice or to ignore what's in front of us. So you take the simple example of war and peace. In times of war, people really value peace. And you look at what happened after Second World War, people were talking about it as hopefully being the war that ended all wars. And it was traumatic enough that the people who experienced it didn't want to experience that again. And then their children heard about it. So when your parents experienced the war and told you about it, it made it quite prominent in your mind what it was. You heard stories about it, which are scary. And then as a child of someone who experienced war, you're still quite aware of how horrible war is and how desirable peace is. We value it. As grandchildren as well, and your grandparents still talk about war and the trauma and the horrors of that, we value the peace. And then the fourth generation comes around, and we start becoming more forgetful about the realities of war and what they are. Get caught up in views and self-righteousness and start fighting about stuff again. Now, this is a cycle we can notice in human history again and again. And it's very interesting that the Buddha, in establishing his First Noble Truths, presents things in the order as he does. He talks about suffering, about dukkha, about discontent first. And then how it arises, and then points to the end, to the cessation and the peace that we can find when we let go of suffering, when we let go of desire. There's something about the human psyche that is not necessarily interested in peace if it is not aware of the suffering. So when we do study suffering, when we do willingly take an interest in it and start opening to it, and it can be any measure of suffering. It can be the small annoyances and irritations of life, the way it can be stronger sense of pain and the difficulties that arise from strife between people in the family, at work, with friends. When we experience suffering, then we're eager to find peace, to find resolution, to find a way out of suffering. If we don't notice the suffering, then peace doesn't seem to be something of much value, because in the absence of suffering, we're just happy, delighting in whatever little joys are coming our way. And we feel reasonably at peace in our little bubble of happiness. But these moments of happiness don't last, and then when we do suffer, then we remember we wish to find a way out of it. So the Buddha is pointing to cessation, the ending, and reminding us that in the ending is to be found peace, is to be found release from suffering. So how do we train ourselves to notice cessation? What is it in our lives, in our daily lives? What is it in our practice? What is it in meditation that we can do to start educating ourselves, to start training in paying attention to cessation? So take the small things. When we sit down for a moment of practice, or just any time of the day, really, when you sit down, rather than sitting down and grabbing a book or launching into meditation or just relaxing and looking out the window, whatever it is that we do when we're sitting, we can either sit down and engage directly into whatever it is we're doing, or we can sit down and just take a moment to notice when we sit down, it's the end of a certain type of activity. It is really like just marking a pause and appreciating this is the end of this. And there's a moment of quiet, of peace, and then we can engage into the next activity. But noticing the ending there is something very pleasant, actually. Our experience of having a body and having a mind is a restless experience, no matter which way you look at it. This body, the feelings and sensations in the body are always changing. The mind is a pretty restless experience as well, with all these memories and thoughts and emotions arising and ceasing all the time. So there's no shortage of stuff we can pay attention to and start appreciating the ending of. And every time we do that, it's really worthwhile remembering the way, what we're trying to do is to really develop a taste for this peace. Learn to value it. Take an interest in it. Notice when it's there and learning to dwell in it. And very often the way we can help ourselves to do that is by noticing the discontent, the restlessness, the agitation, the frustration, the tension that there generally is in experience when we're operating from desire. If we're living our lives and then we come and we sit down for a moment of meditation, got 10 minutes, got half an hour, got an hour, and we sit down to meditate, and we're goal-driven, well, then we're sitting down in order to get something. I want to get samadhi, I want to get calm, I want to develop jhanas, which are fine, really. But as in terms of an experience, if what we're doing when we finish an activity, come and sit down and we're really kind of on a program here, well, then we're driven by desire. And desire is always a sense of tension, because here and now is not good enough and I'm wanting something else. And so there's a tension in the mind between here, the way things are in this body and this mind, and what we imagine and that we desire and wish, and we're pulling towards that. That pull is tension, and we experience it as tension in the body, in the mind. Whatever form of desire it is, if it's sense desire, kama tanha, this eagerness to experience something delightful and pleasurable through the senses, desire to get something, to become somebody, to become a good meditator, a successful meditator, to get concentration, and then hold on to it when it's there. Or whether it's a desire to get away from whatever restlessness and discontent or disappointments, depression, despair, grief, anger, jealousy, whatever the emotions are that we might want to get away from, which arise in the mind, which arise in life. And then we come to meditation, and meditation is about being peaceful. The Ajahn said it's about peace. I'm going to get peace. And we do that, and we're trying to get rid of these unpleasant states of mind and striving to develop something desirable. But again, it's desire to get rid of something, desire to become something we're not. So that's tension. And we can really notice that tension in the mind and the body. So if we notice that that's what we're doing when we come to sit down for a moment of practice of meditation, or at any given moment of the day, it doesn't have to be related to formal practice. It can be just interactions. You're in the kitchen at home, doing the dishes or preparing food or just cleaning up a bit, and the phone rings or someone steps into the kitchen and you're in your little own world wanting to do your own thing. And this is sometimes that can be felt as a disruption or a distraction, or something we get carried away with, enjoying the company. And in one way or another, we start experiencing change and we run with it, or we don't want it to happen. We can relate one way or another to this tension that tends to arise, sometimes very low-key tension. But if in the mind we are intent on noticing tension, discontent, whichever form it takes, but we're interested in it. We're not wanting to criticize it. We're not trying to get rid of it. We want to understand it, to notice it, to study it, appreciate how it works. How does it operate? How does it arise? How we get caught up in it? And how we can take out the hook and not be caught anymore. It might still be happening, but then there's a sense of being free from it. So it's really about being interested in Dhamma, being interested in the mind, being interested in tension, in discontent, in excitement, in desire, and in cessation. And noticing, when does it cease? If we are paying attention and curious and interested, investigating dukkha under whatever form it takes, even in a moment of joy and excitement, just wondering, somewhere in the corner of the mind, there's this investigative side that's still going on, going, right now, in this excitement and joy and thrill of life, It's springtime, the sun is shining, the flowers are blooming, the birds are singing. Going out for a walk and just feels like a great day to be alive. And then in the corner of the mind, not as a party pooper, but really as an interest, it's like, what is the Buddha talking about? That even in a moment like this, how would awareness of the Four Noble Truths inform consciousness here and now? What is it? And even just asking that question makes you take a step back from the engagement, the throwing ourselves into the thrill of life and excitement of a brand new day, beautiful and glorious. And something as simple as that, you're still experiencing the same joy. You're still sensitive to the weather, to the spring, to the sunshine and the flowers. People generally are in a happier mood, and it gives you this kind of effervescent, bubbly feeling of joy. We're still sensitive to that. We can still appreciate it. But then there's a difference when we're coming back to what is it the Buddha's, how is it that what the Buddha talks about applies now? How would it inform consciousness, awareness? And you realize what it does is it makes you take a different point of view on what is you're experiencing right now. So you're still experiencing the same thing, but you're looking at it from a different place. Instead of operating from a place of grasping, desire, following the desire, grasping hold of it and becoming, we're coming from a position of interest and investigation, of curiosity, a desire to understand, to look at the full picture. And when we step back and look at the experience from this point of view of awareness, that's a point of view from which we can notice cessation. So things arise, let them arise. Whether it's the excitement of the morning experience on a spring morning, or whether it's just the experience of sitting down for meditation, going out for a walk, cleaning up the dishes after a meal. There's always something that is ending. And we can always come back and just ask ourselves, what is it that there is now? And can I pay attention to when it ends? And what is it that happens when it ends? Can I appreciate this peace that the Buddha is talking about that is present in cessation? So if we come back to this position of awareness, of interest in the experience of the moment, excitement and disappointment, hopes and fears and worries and anxiety and confidence and all these different moods and up and downs are still present. But now we're relating to them out of an interest in understanding. We're stepping back from the habit of grasping and following, either desire to get something or to desire to get rid of something. And we're still percipient of those reactions. The reactions may still arise of wanting and not wanting, but now we're watching it all, taking an interest in it. And that's a position where we're not so eager to be born into the experience of the moment. The experience still arises and ceases, but our relationship is less one of grasping and being born into it as the observer of experience. And then we're in a position where we can actually see experiences arise and cease and choose to stay with it as it ceases and notice what happens when it ceases, once it has ceased. Because where that leaves us, when we come back to this position of knowing, of awareness, of an experience arising, ceasing, and has ceased, that's when you realize that where you're at, when you're watching, knowing impermanence, you're with awareness. This awareness is here and now. It's knowing cessation. So knowing cessation, this determination to know cessation brings us to this position, back to this position of awareness, which is the refuge. Awareness here and now. And this is the consciousness, the awareness, the knowing that the Buddha and all the teachers talk about as the refuge. That which is, like Lumpur likes to remind us, that which is unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. From the position of awareness, we can witness creation, what is created. It arises and ceases. If we follow desire and grasp creation, then we follow it, and our moods arise and cease with it. And we are created and then die, because we went and grasped something that arises and ceases. From the position of awareness, of knowing, we can see things being formed. If we grasp it, then I is formed. But from this position of awareness, we witness arising and ceasing. So coming back to this interest in cessation brings us back to this position of awareness, of knowing. And we can really measure how stepping into desire, grasping it, becoming, leads to agitation, because we're stepping into the storm. We're stepping into and grasping something that arises and ceases and goes all over the place. So the experience is going to be all over the place. We're going to experience agitation, happiness and suffering, hope and despair, all the ups and downs of experience. And that is suffering. That is difficult. It's painful. It's tiring. It's exhausting. When we come back to this position from where we can take an interest in and notice cessation, well, then we step out of the storm. We step into the eye of the storm, so to speak, the still point where it's quiet. And we can see the whole thing spinning around, but we're experiencing it from a still point, a point of tranquility. So in the process of practice, we keep doing that. We keep getting caught up in stuff and stepping into it. And then we realize, oh, here's dukkha again. Come back to the awareness. Notice cessation. So these are really skillful means, ways to come back to the refuge of awareness. And as we practice and we keep going back and forth, appreciate the difference between the two, because this is really educating the heart. Even using the imperfection, how we perceive ourselves to yet be so far away from finishing the practice. I still got so much to do. Never mind all of that stuff. Here and now, come back to this appreciation of, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, this is dukkha. It arises and ceases, and the position, which is a safe position from which to experience, to witness dukkha, is this position from which you can know cessation. notice the ending. So I'd like to leave it at that for now and open the opportunity for people to ask questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you so much, Ajahn. So the floor is open to everyone participate in the Q&A session. If you have a question, please feel free to click on the raise hand button or type your question or wave to me and unmute you. Sri-Wan, did you wave to me? No? It was a question. Oh, yes. Okay. Kunrat, can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, Ajahn. I have a question in terms of noticing the cessation. Is there any relation to that with the gap that you had mentioned before, observing silence?
Very much so, yes. Yeah, that's a good point. It is. Noticing the gap between the thoughts is noticing cessation. So in noticing cessation, there is the process of ceasing. And then once something has ceased, there's the absence. In the Satipatthana Sutta, there's a very interesting to notice how when the Buddha is talking about the mind, its body, feelings, mind, and mind objects, when the Buddha is talking about the mind, there are these different aspects that he is pointing to, recommending paying attention to. And it's always about presence and absence of, and whichever are the words that you choose to describe them, but he's talking about knowing when the mind is overcome with anger or when it's free from anger. Knowing the mind that is affected by lust, desire, the mind that is free from lust. Knowing the mind that is affected by delusion, knowing the mind when it's free from delusion. Knowing the concentrated mind or the unconcentrated mind. Knowing the contracted or the distracted mind. Knowing a mind that's liberated or a mind that's not liberated. The mind that is surpassed or unsurpassed. And it's really interesting to notice how he talks about this, because it is similar to noticing cessation. It's noticing and learning to value this perspective, this point from which we can actually appreciate the presence or absence of something. And when you're starting to incline the mind towards noticing presence and absence of anything in particular, they can take anger for one, because that's the one that's always very easy to spot. It's such a strong, energetic state of mind. When we want to start noticing presence and absence, we will by necessity start noticing cessation, the process of ceasing, because we're interested not just in the presence of, but the absence of. And so we're coming to a point inside from where we're going to start looking at it differently than when we are either carried away with it or trying to get rid of it. Those two are what we call grasping and attaching. And the point of view of the witness, of knowing, is really the point of view of awareness. So whether you call it cessation, like in the Third Noble Truth, or whether you're referring to it as in the Satipatthana Suttas, where noticing presence and absence, or noticing the gap between thoughts, they're all skillful means that we can pick up and use to train ourselves, to practice leaving this point of view where we relate to experience in terms of self. I want, I don't want, I don't like, I am not. And we're coming back to a point of view of witnessing experience in terms of what it is rather than in terms of what I want it to be, what I am, what I'm not, what I want to be, what I don't want to be. So yes, it's very much a similar point to noticing the gaps between the thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanajan. So there's a question here. It's a typewritten question. Let me read it out to you, Tanajan. It's from Christine. And her question is, how do we calm our busy mind instantly when we are in a situation that the mind is occupied by thoughts after thoughts?
Did I hear the word instantly?
That's right.
That's a very modern question. Instant noodles, fast food. That's what we like, isn't it? Well, if you want to do that instantly, then you have to instantly come back to awareness. That is the short answer to the question. But it's also interesting to notice how these questions arise in the mind do come from desire, like wanting to instantly come back to a sense of peace and step out of a storm of thinking is usually something we want to do because the thinking is disturbing, it's restless, it's agitated. And sometimes the content of the thinking can be unpleasant too. It can be bound up with unpleasant memories, difficult memories, painful, traumatic memories. It can be bound up with a lot of worry about the future. And there are plenty of things we can worry about in this life. And so if the mind is in that state where it's full of energy and very primed to think, and then the contents of the thought are these very reactive, this is a very reactive type of content, then we want to get away from that. And then it's very interesting to notice how we can use something like the teaching to justify desire, but we are reacting. It's vibhava tanha again. So notice that. Notice how can I instantly drop all thinking and drop into silence and awareness. It's a valid question and it's a good question, but it's also very often bound up with this desire to get rid of thinking because thinking is unpleasant. It's an unpleasant state of mind to be agitated by thinking. And especially if the contents of the thinking are unpleasant too, then we even more so would like to get away from it. So that's something that's really important to notice, because if that's where we're operating from, it is less likely that we will succeed in our aspiration of finding peace from thinking, because we're operating from desire. And every time we grasp desire, the result is always the same, it's suffering. What is helpful to do when the mind is in a thinking mode like that is bring the Four Noble Truths back into the picture to inform your perspective. Operating from a sense of habitual self-grasping desire, the way we relate to an agitated state of mind that is caught up in a lot of thinking, is to want to get rid of it and quiet it down so we can find some peace and some respite, some relief from thinking. So you can appreciate how a lot of thinking is somewhat distressing. It's tiring. It kind of can even throw you off. It's irritating. It's like someone nagging at us all the time who just won't shut up. Just leave me alone. Sometimes that's how we react to the thinking. Just leave me alone. And what we can do is the same, going against the grain of habit. Instead of reacting to suffering and wanting to either run away from it or get rid of it when it arises, which is what we do usually, out of ignorance, turning around and welcoming it. And in terms of thinking, that means stopping and just acknowledging the fact that right now, thinking is just gone, is kind of taking the bit in its mouth and is running away uncontrollably. But thinking is not self. Thinking is thinking. The moment we can come back to this and remind ourselves, awareness of thinking is a position from which you come back to the awareness, and in awareness, thinking arises. Sometimes it is a state of mind that can have a lot of energy to it, especially if something has happened that is feeding thoughts with something that seems like really worth thinking about, really worth worrying about. But if we come back to awareness, step away from this point of view where I am thinking a lot. I want to get rid of thinking. I want to experience peace of mind. I want to get samadhi. I want to get tranquility, serenity. I want to be able to sit down, instantly let go of all thinking, connect with this peace, end of suffering, third noble truth. Yay! And then we're happy. So this is what we're doing when we're coming from a point of view of self, is relating to the experience of thinking, of worrying, in terms of self. We like it or we don't like it. We get carried away with it and then we don't know how to put it down anymore. So it's not so much, the question is not so much how do I get rid of the thinking, how do I instantly drop it? It vanishes from existence. And I'm back at this space of peace and quiet, tranquility. What we need to do instead of trying to get rid of it is turn to it and look at it in terms of non-self, in terms of the Four Noble Truths. If you look at the definition of the Four Noble Truths, whether it's just the four words that qualify each one, suffering, origin, cessation, path, or you go into any form of detailed description of it, there's no personal pronoun in there. It's not about I, me, and mine. It's about the way things are. And that's the difference between this point of view that is involved with self and made of this sense of self, and the point of view of Dhamma, where you look at things for what they are in terms of arising in consciousness. So then in terms of that, it becomes in consciousness right now, there's a hell of a lot of thinking going on. You can even look at what the thinking is about, the contents of the thoughts. And that's almost like two different aspects of it. One aspect is the state of mind. It's kind of this high RPM state of thinking a lot. So it's spinning very fast. It's going to take a while for that thing to slow down. You can't just stop that instantly. It's got an energy to it, and it's not going to just go poof like out of an act of magic. All that energy will dissipate. That thing that's spinning very fast will slow down eventually and stop. You've got to we need to allow the process to follow its own course, to follow its nature. So that's the state of mind of thinking. And then you can look at what the thoughts are about. It's about the past, about the future, fearing it's going to be one way and wanting it to be another way, or it was a certain way, but I would have liked it to be another way. Whatever that is. But come back to this position of, instead of saying, I'm thinking too much, I want to instantly drop the thought, the thinking, and find this peace, this relief, which is all in terms of I. Come back to this point of view of, in terms of Dhamma, what is it? Instead of I am thinking, come back to awareness, to consciousness, and say, in terms of just consciousness right now, what is this? It's thinking. The moment you come back to that, you are back with awareness. And awareness allows you that position of being aware of a sankhara arising, of a thought, of a state of mind. You can be aware of that. And then you can come back and sit down and feel all tense because of the worry and stuff, and just notice. Breathing in, breathing out. Noticing tension in the body. In terms of consciousness, it's the experience of the body feeling tense. In terms of the mind, this is what thinking is like. And if you're finding it unpleasant and you want to find peace, that's fine. Allow that process to happen. That's natural too. But witness it from a point of view of knowing, of awareness. Always bring it back into consciousness, pure consciousness, which is not bound to the body. Like Lumpur Sumedho is always reminding us, consciousness is not in the body is in consciousness. So come back to that and just remind yourself, in terms of consciousness right now, that is wide open, infinite, and pure, is just made of pure knowing. In consciousness, these experiences arises. All these experiences arise. Thinking is part of them. So you're stepping back from the thinking. So in a way, you could say that that is the instant relief from thinking, is just the moment you take that step back to consciousness, relieved from the burden of it, because you put it down. You allow it to be what it is. It doesn't mean it goes away and vanishes. It'll do what it has to do, and it will cease if you allow it. And the way we allow thinking to cease is coming back to awareness that thinking is like this. And then you can breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and going, breathing in, there's thinking, breathing out, there's thinking. Take a deep in-breath and you let it out and relax a bit. And as you relax that, you can literally feel the grasping thinking. That grasping starts to relax. You're letting go of thinking. You're allowing it to be what it is. Whether it stays or goes, that's its own business. It's none of our business. We don't need to get involved with that. All we need to do is come back to the awareness, reminding ourselves there is awareness, and in awareness, this is happening. And then we can use the breathing just to ground ourselves here and now with the body. As a skillful means to stay in touch with the present moment, with awareness here and now of thinking. So sometimes I've got some really busy days planning stuff for myself, but for Lumpur as well. I got to talk with people, establish schedules of this, that, and the other. I can reach a time in the day when I sit down. There's no way I'm going to sit down and it's going to be an experience of peace and bliss, because the mind has been busy the whole day, the whole morning, or whatever it is. So if my expectation is to come and sit down and experience peace of mind, quiet, samadhi, all this kind of beautiful stuff, it's very nice if it does. But to expect that to happen, given those circumstances of the morning, is not very reasonable. It's not acknowledging reality in terms of I'm being maybe walking back and forth all over the monastery, intent on my business, bumping into people, saying hello, they have a question, or something comes to mind and I want to grasp the opportunity to say, oh, by the way, do you have a moment? And just do a quick touching base with someone and then move on, get on to my business. So physically I'm active, and then mentally there's all this stuff going on, ticking items off the list. And then I finally get back to my room or in the field or wherever I am, when I can finally sit down for a moment and expecting everything to just drop away and experience blissful peace of mind. That's a misunderstanding of how the body and mind work. However, if I'm able to come back to awareness, I can sit down anywhere and just go, ask myself, what is it like right now? What's the body like? I was really relieved to finally sit down. But what's the mind like? I was like, wow, I'm kind of still reeling there. It's been such a busy morning. Happy that I managed to tick some of the boxes on the to-do list, maybe frustrated because some of them I haven't been able to resolve. And then generally, I'm not much of a procrastinator, but every now and then there is something that comes up and I just don't want to deal with that. And then there's this kind of resistance or negativity in the mind. We all experience this. So it's not about not feeling the way we feel and then getting rid of it all the moment we sit down to meditate, as much as coming back to awareness. And in terms of awareness, what is right now like in terms of body, in terms of mind. And then success and failure and satisfaction and frustration and all of these things, they can be. It's okay. We're not struggling with the present moment the way it is, and that is peaceful. So in terms of sankharas, in terms of how the body feels, what states the minds are in, how much it's thinking, what it's thinking about, and how it feels about it all, it is what it is, and it might not be peaceful. But then if I'm relating to all of that in terms of self, then I will be agitated and confident and feeling ambivalent, because there's feeling good and bad and wanting, and it becomes a very complicated picture. There's so many things to grasp hold of, to try to hold on to, and then we can only hold on to so much. It starts all falling apart. We end up a mess, inevitably. Whereas if we can just come back, sit down and say, look, a mess is like this. And witness what a mess can be like from the position of awareness, rather than the position of self, of wanting or not wanting. So you do experience peace, but it's not peace of sankharas, it's the peace of awareness. Sankharas arise and cease, but the nature of a sankhara is such that it cannot be peaceful. Or if it is, it changes, and then it starts being agitated and restless again. So the key to finding peace with something that is not peaceful, with sankharas, with this body and mind the way they are, is coming back to awareness. In terms of awareness, and it's really helpful to use in this, when we come back to that, to just rephrase things, but without any personal pronouns. It's not about I am happy that I got this done, but I'm unhappy because I still have to do this, or I didn't get that done. So much as just sit down and notice, well, right now there's satisfaction about some stuff, there's dissatisfaction about some other things. There's some feeling light because I got rid of some item, took care of some items of business, and then there's kind of annoyance because I still got this difficult thing to deal with. So that's all in terms of I. And then there's right here and right now, there's satisfaction, some, there's dissatisfaction, some, but all of a sudden it loses its importance. Here and now, all of that is just business, and I can leave the business right there. What I have done and accomplished right now is a memory. what I haven't done and have yet to do, whether I'm looking forward to it or dreading it right now, those are thoughts about the future. Here and now, these are memories, these are thoughts. And there's the breath, and there's awareness. It's all still there, but in terms of awareness, they're not concerns anymore. They're just things that are present or absent here and now. And we can, in terms of coming back to the present moment, do something as simple as reconnecting with the breath in the present, and then opening up and reminding ourselves, what is this in terms of awareness? In terms of Dhamma rather than in terms of I, me, and inevitably what I want and don't want. So you find instant relief from thinking by turning to the thinking, accepting it in awareness. And what's instant is the moment you come back to awareness, out of self to awareness, and all the suffering that's bound up with the point of view that is concerned with self vanishes. The sankharas may stay the same, but from the point of view of awareness, then there is relief. And that is instant. So you're not getting rid of the thinking, you're changing the attitude and the perspective on it.
Sadhu, Ajahn. Can I now invite Karen? Karen, if you can please press the unmute button. Thank you.
Hi, Ajahn. My question is a little bit reversed. Basically, what happens when peace comes to an end? There's a cessation of peace. So far we talked about how dukkha and thinking, the cessation of that is peace. But what happens when peace ends? Meaning, in a good sit, perhaps, you have a nice flow, and then you have a great stable meditation process. What happens when you feel the bubbling of emergent thoughts? What do you do in that particular instance? Already you are in awareness, you are already aware of the emergent thoughts bubbling to the surface. What can I do, for example?
We can identify with peace in meditation and not recognize that states of mind are exactly that. They're states of the mind. And so peaceful meditation leaves you with a very peaceful state of mind. And then we grasp that and don't want it to change. So it is what it is, and it's very pleasant and it's very nice. And it does give us a relief, a temporary relief from all the agitation and suffering of life and experience. But it's very good to notice that it's a state of mind as well. Awareness itself is like when you come back to awareness, the only characteristic of awareness is knowing. But it's not affected by what it knows. And so if it's a state of mind you're looking at, if it's restless and agitated, you can notice that. But awareness is not agitated and restless. Awareness knows agitation and restlessness is like this. And then that ceases, and in terms of conditions, state of mind is a sankhara, it's a condition, then the agitation and restlessness ceases and there's peace of the sankharas. The state of mind is peaceful. And then you can know awareness is aware of a peaceful state of mind, but it's still a state of mind. It's still impermanent, unsatisfactory because it is impermanent. If it would last forever, then it would be satisfying, and everybody would be buying some of that. But because it's a state of mind, it changes, and therefore it'll satisfy you, but not for long, because once it changes, then you're like, nah, discontent again. So notice that state of mind, and if you grasp it, then you made a self out of it. It's not self, it's just a state of mind. And always coming back to the awareness awareness of peaceful states of mind. But it's interesting to notice how language works here, because language inevitably is descriptive and categorizes stuff so that we can relate to them in terms of the world. And so when we speak of peace or happiness, we can make a thing out of it again. So in terms of the flow of sankharas, the flow of anything that's conditioned, it arises and ceases, there can be the peace in the cessation of the conditions, and it's good to start noticing them, because then we start taking an interest in those, and we start losing an interest in all the activities that usually land us with agitation and restlessness and eventually suffering. So we learn to relate to experience in a way that we're more interested in the peaceful experiences than the exciting ones, inclining towards those. But as we do that, then we're also coming to a position where they're not as engaging. They can still be engaging. So experiencing very peaceful together meditation, where you hit the groove and you're just staying with it the whole time, and then ding, their little alarm goes and you have to get up and do something or other. I don't want to. Notice that. But if you come back to the knowing, you'll realize even that is something you can grasp and get attached to. And then it's a cause for suffering, because it does change and you don't want it to. If you come back to this sense of knowing, just ask yourself, in terms of awareness, what is this? It's awareness of peace. And then peace changes, but the awareness doesn't change. It knows peace when it arises, it knows peace as it lasts. And then when conditions change, awareness knows conditions are changing, but the awareness itself is not affected by this. So when we talk about peace, and there can be different levels of peace, and you say ultimate peace. Oh, I want that. But it's still words. What you can know, and really, what you know for yourself, that nobody else can give you or show you, but it's something you really know for yourself, is when you come back to the sense of awareness and really appreciate. In terms of awareness, you can be aware of, before you sat, the mind was in a state of maybe not huge agitation, but it was moving around and stuff. And then when the sitting kind of settles, becomes super peaceful. And that lasts as long as it does. And then we have to get on with life, because this body has needs and it needs to interact with the rest of the world. And as we do that, then things start bubbling up again, as you said. And this sense of peace changes, and there's again a certain level of business, of agitation, which is not as pleasant as this kind of deep, open stillness. In terms of awareness, you can notice that. And then what you start relating to in terms of peace changes. Yes, there is peace in meditation, and that is very nice, it's desirable, and we can cultivate it. But then we relate to it in a way that we can receive it in this open hand, but we don't feel we have to grasp it every time it arises and then regret we have to let go of it. We can receive it and know this too is impermanent. But in terms of awareness, the awareness doesn't lose the peace. You're stepping back, you're going a layer, it's almost like you're going a layer further in, where you're not even agitated by peace and disturbance. You go beyond that.
Ajahn, Tanajan, would you say that awareness is the ultimate peace rather than the peaceful states that you experience in meditation?
Yes, you could say that. Yeah. In the same way that we relate to peace in terms of meditation, even that is something that we have to educate ourselves to appreciate. Because sometimes we appreciate it just because the circumstances make us. Like when I was talking about war and peace as an experience in countries and in the world, we appreciate it because of the circumstances, because if we've witnessed war, experienced war, then we really value peace. Or if our parents or grandparents have and took to it about us, then through circumstances, we come to the position where we appreciate it. Or we can educate ourselves and really go out and look for, notice really in terms of our experience. What does it feel like being in conflict and being free from conflict? And you don't need to experience wars with bombs and guns and all the horrors of war in order to investigate that. You can stay at home and investigate that with yourself. Conflict with the present moment, wanting it to be one way, not wanting it to be one way. In our relationships with the people we live, we agree on some things, we don't on others. And there's always these very natural worldly tendencies to kind of want things to be our way. And if we're investigating and studying that, we can see how if we follow that, it will very often lead to conflict with our neighbors, with the husband, the wife, the kids, the parents, the friends, the other monastics in the monastery, because that's the nature of the world. And so if we are interested in this and we look at it and we really sensitize ourselves to this, we can start appreciating it, and then we refine that in us which is sensitive to suffering and to absence of suffering. And we keep kind of studying both of these and watching how experience has both. And every time we notice it, and that's why noticing cessation is such a gem, because it allows us to notice the dukkha that arises in daily life. But then if we stick with it and pay attention, even if we're doing other stuff, but out of the corner of our eyes, we still keep an eye on this, like when does this dissolve and cease and how does that feel? We are becoming more insensitive to going from dukkha to the end of dukkha, even in small moments throughout the day. And it's the same movement that brings us back to awareness. Because when you experience peaceful states of mind in meditation, and then they cease because you have to get up and get on with life, that is also suffering in a way. And stepping back from that suffering, back into awareness and accepting that it's like this. Peace in meditation is pleasant, and that also ceases. It's the same process of stepping back. You just step in further, where your refuge is the awareness of conditions arising and ceasing. And the peace that you experience there is the absence of even the suffering that arises when peace of mind, peaceful states of mind end and change.
So there's a question from a friend from Lisbon, Portugal, from Paula. And her question is, she recalls a time that Thanajan, you suggested some exercises to notice when you don't think. And whether this current juncture, Thanajan could speak more about this exercise, please.
No, that's one of Luang Por's teachings and exercises, very, very skillful mean. And I think we touched on it just a bit earlier, noticing the gaps between thinking. So it's a very useful tool of learning to notice thinking. In our current world, like a lot of, especially in the West, but in Asia as well, just worldwide generally, there's such great value placed on education, which is good. It leads to a lot of benefits in life. But you can notice how as we go through school, kindergarten, we're playing a lot, and then in primary school, there's a process of moving towards homework. And then high school and university, we're kind of consuming books by the kilo. And we're tested on our knowledge. So it's all about acquiring information. And we're praised for acquiring a lot of it, holding on to it, and being able to regurgitate it. So I'm kind of speaking about it in a very kind of simplistic way. But the point I'm trying to make is that we relate to information, knowledge, as something that's very praiseworthy. And it is useful, it is beneficial, but it's not yet part of the curriculum in any educational program that I've heard of, to put down thinking, to let it go. And sometimes the image that comes to my mind is like we learn to handle a tool, because that's what thinking is. It's a tool, a very useful one. It's like learning to handle a hammer, where you can hammer nails in, you can use it a bit of a crowbar every now and again, you can pull nails out, you can do many very, very useful things with a hammer. But when it's time to clean your windows, you don't want that thing in your hand. You need to put it down, otherwise you're going to break some glass. That's what's happening with thinking. We learn to think and we learn to use it to much benefit, and yet nobody tells us or talks about the value of putting that tool down. And yet you don't even have to be finished studies and step into kind of professional life. Even as a student in high school, you see some people really suffering from stress, from anxiety. There's such a high value placed on succeeding, passing exams, that people get really stressed out, fearing they will not pass the exams. I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where later in life, years after you've completed your studies and you're in professional life, you still have these nightmares. And in the nightmare, you're caught up in some sort of situation relating to these exams, and you're not ready for the exam. And there's this kind of panic in the dream. And eventually that wears off. At least it has for me, but I hope for most people. But it just shows you kind of how we are conditioned, and a lot of our life is directed through education and upbringing at home through praise and blame. And our society really praises education and thinking. So again, I'm not criticizing that. What I'm pointing out is we don't learn how to put it down. And then we suffer because of that. When the object of thinking is negative, then we become self-critical, we worry, we become anxious, maybe even get panic attacks, we become depressed, and we become hounded by thinking. The thinking just won't stop. So of course you come to a meditation class and you ask, how can I instantly drop thinking? Because we want relief from this stuff. It's natural. So this is where this exercise of Lompo Sumedos is such a gem. It's very, very simple. And I think a lot of people overlook it. They hear about it and kind of understand the principles of it and go, oh yeah, that sounds great, but they don't actually use it. And it's really meant to be used. It's very simple, and it's about intentionally thinking something very simple, a sentence that just is a couple of words, and something neutral to begin with. I am human. Now you can choose your words, your sentence, but that's one that's very simple. And so you sit, you stop, and you just go, I am thinking. You can say it out loud, or you can just say it in your mind, where it's more thoughts rather than words. And you think the word I, and notice that you can stop before the word am, and then you can stop before the word human. So intentionally, you're bringing up these three words one after the other, but with a slight gap in between. And the point of the exercise is to notice the gap. Between I and am, what happens? What is that? I am human. Notice how accustomed we are to pay attention to the words. We're not accustomed, we're not trained, we haven't been taught and we haven't practiced paying attention to what happens before I arises, between I and am, between am and human. And after human has passed, it's not a very long word. I is the shortest one, but human, 2 syllables, it's gone like that. We don't usually pay attention to that stuff. So that's the point of the exercise. Learning to notice something that's there all the time, but that we never pay attention to, that we don't usually appreciate the value of. That's a very, very simple exercise. And what it helps us to notice is, first of all, there is such a thing as non-thinking. The space between 2 thoughts is not a thought, yet there's awareness there. So when you go, I am, between those 2, you're still aware. You might be aware of sensations in the body. I'm in a very quiet room here with you today. So there's carpet on the floor, curtains on the walls. It's in Amaravati, which is quiet. So if I go, I am, in terms of sound between the 2, I hear a little bit of a slight tinnitus in my ears, but otherwise it's dead quiet here. So we've got these other 5 senses operating. I am human. And between the thoughts, there's still awareness of whatever is in the room here. Sight is still operating. Hearing is operating. There are no smells, so nothing arises there. Tastes and smells, nothing there. But in terms of body, there's still feelings in the body. So awareness doesn't just vanish between words. Awareness is still there, and then there are other things that arise in awareness, but they're not thoughts. They're feelings, sights, sounds. But there's awareness there. So do that. I am human. I am thinking. I am a monk. I am a layperson. I'm a man. I'm a woman. I'm European. I'm Asian. You can choose whatever you like, all these different things, or you can just say the sun is shining. It doesn't have to be about I either. It can be anything at all. But generally, thoughts that are neutral, that don't sort of bring up memories or a lot of thinking or emotions, are the best ones to start with. And really just use that. I am sitting, breathing in, breathing out. It can be really anything at all. And notice the thought and the absence of thought. So back to I am human. Notice before the thought I arises, you're aware. But the thought I hasn't arisen yet, so there isn't that thought. That is the absence of that thought. And then I am human. At the beginning, it can be a little bit disconcerting because we're so unfamiliar with paying attention to non-thinking that we don't even recognize it. We think there's nothing there, or we think we're missing something. Or maybe we feel confused, uncertain. That's fine. Just keep at it and notice. Really keep it extremely simple and notice the difference between the thought that you intentionally think, and then before the next thought arises, just notice that gap. And as you do so, you will start appreciating it. You will start noticing, yeah, it's just a gap between 2 thoughts. Awareness is still aware. Sometimes what you can do is use listening. You notice just about anybody, kids and adults are the same. If you're in an environment and all of a sudden you turn to somebody and you say, hey, listen, can you hear that noise? And people go. And for a moment they stop thinking because they're listening. And we can do that to ourselves. Before the reaction is, yeah, I can hear it. Now, what are you talking about? And then thinking takes over again. But there's for a moment there's no thinking. So tune into that ability to listen and then listen to the gap, what's happening in the gap between two thoughts, and just notice there is no thought there. And this will really start making you wise to thinking and non-thinking. You start noticing it, you start appreciating it, you start understanding it. And as you do that, you can start going, I am human. And you're in no rush to pull up that thought human, because you're really enjoying the gap between the second word and the third word. It becomes enjoyable. So talking about peace, as we were earlier, you start realizing thoughts are fine, they're useful and everything, but when you can put it down and just rest with a gap between two thoughts, it's a very peaceful experience. It's very enjoyable. So you do this exercise, and after a while, you're starting to enjoy the peace that you find in those gaps between thoughts, so enjoyable. You kind of start putting these thoughts up less and less and just enjoying the peace and quiet. This will reflect it'll echo into the rest of your day. If you're able to do this every time you sit meditation, even just for a couple of minutes, just do a couple of them. It doesn't have to be many. If you just do that, I am human, this is sitting, meditation now, breathing, whatever, just use a few words, bring them up, but always the intention is to notice the gap between the thoughts. If you can do that every time you sit down, even for 30 seconds, you will be surprised how powerfully that kind of echoes into the rest of your day. And as you wisen up to and become more aware and understanding of the simple fact that there is thinking and there is non-thinking, you start appreciating that gap between thoughts. You start appreciating the ability to step away from thinking. If you've held on to a hammer your whole life and every time you clean the windows you break glass, finally someone tells you, hey, look, this is how you put down the hammer and you can start cleaning windows without breaking glass, you'll feel happy. So you start appreciating thinking and non-thinking. You start noticing it at other times during the day. And then every now and again, you'll start being surprised how in a given situation, a thought arises and you notice in the past, you would have followed that thought, believed it, whatever it's telling you, and ran with it. And then here you find yourself not reacting to the thought. And you start appreciating the freedom you have from being able to allow thinking to be just what it is and not having to be a slave to thinking. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, neutral thoughts, positive thoughts, negative thoughts, judgmental thoughts, critical thoughts, appreciative thoughts, wonderful thoughts, thoughts about the Dhamma. They're all just thoughts. And there's nothing like, even thoughts about Dhamma, they're great. They're still just pointers that we can put down thinking, it'll always be peaceful. So play with that contrast. Use that exercise. And then you'll find yourself, if you really start doing this and appreciate it, then you'll find yourself doing that when you're going for a walk in Kew Gardens. When you're on a flight somewhere, when you're going to the office, sitting down in a conference and people are talking away and you find yourself getting reactive to a situation, to people, to what they're saying, how they're saying it. And even in the middle of a meeting, you can just sit there and Nobody has a clue what you're doing. As far as they're concerned, you're listening. But inside you go, I am fed up. And it might reflect a feeling, but what you're doing is not buying into the feeling. You're just bringing it up, putting it in words, and then stepping back from the words. And the moment you do that, you're back into this awareness of feelings. And what I discovered to be the hidden gem of this exercise is that it gives us an incredible skillful context from which to approach thinking and use thinking, and it gives us the ability to put it down and develop that ability. But then what it's also doing is, because we're coming back to this position of awareness of thinking and then awareness of the absence of thoughts, then that will start translating to any other sankhara that you experience, emotions as well. And when you can realize there is emotion and then there's the absence of emotion, and your refuge is awareness, then you can experience emotions, states of mind, and not be a slave to them either. They can be what they are. They're not threatening, they're not dangerous, they're not scary. You can be pissing mad at somebody and really feel it in your whole body, in your whole mind, and you're cool as a cucumber because your refuge is awareness. So this is a very simple little exercise, and it's worth more than you can imagine. Really encourage you to use it and develop it. And I believe we're reaching the end of our time together.
Handamayang Dhammat Kathaya Sadhu Karam Tatamase Sadhu 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 Anumodami. First, sisters, can I request you put your arms together in Anjali? You pay respect to Ajahn. Arahan Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Bhuttam Bhagavatam Avivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhamman Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Please join me with 3 bows for Ajahn. First bow. Second bow. Third bow.
Thank you for having organized and arranged this, and for all of you for attending.
Thank you. And so, brothers and sisters, join us for the last installment of the session with Ajahn next week. And at the same time, 8 a.m. UK time. Check your time zone, please. See you again next week.